It's 1982. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan had just released in cinemas, Ozzy Osbourne was biting the heads off bats, and the Vectrex video game console made its way onto store shelves across the US. The Vectrex had several unique selling points. For one, it used futuristic vector graphics instead of raster-based pixel graphics, where the image is made up of dots on the monitor. Vector graphics, on the other hand, use mathematically simulated lines, so no matter how much you zoom in or out, they look just as clean and sharp. Another was the all-in-one configuration. Jay Smith, the man in charge of seeing this product's success, teamed up with General Consumer Electronics on the condition that he used a larger monitor than originally intended. Why? Because GCE had already manufactured the popular Game Time. Game Time was a watch that had 4 games built into it. This was different from something like the Game & Watch from Nintendo, where it had a single game installed. So they went about using 9-inch CRT monitors and shoved it into a plastic body and made it look like a mini arcade cabinet. This was somewhat of a far cry from the original concept. Hardware designer John Ross conceived the idea to make use of a tiny 1-inch cathode ray tube. After meeting with Jay Smith, he was quite impressed, leading to the eventual meetup with General Consumer Electronics. It did so well to begin with, the Vectrex steadily increased in sales throughout 1983. So well in fact that Milton Bradley, the popular board game maker of The Game of Life, went ahead and bought GCE and joined the fray. This allowed the Vectrex to be sold in Europe, and there was also a co-branding agreement set up with Bandai to sell the console in Japan under the name Bandai Vectrex Kusokusen. It wasn't to last though due to the video game crash of 1983. All sales pertaining to electronic games plundered, and with it the Vectrex short-lived promises of success. Milton Bradley took a massive loss in sales. The rest of the Vectrex stock was practically given away at paltry prices. In May 1984, Milton Bradley merged with Hasbro, and the Vectrex was discontinued a few months later. During 1984 and beyond, it was barely going for $50, far less than its original $199 retail price. Such a shame too, as a sequel handheld console was in fact planned, which would make full use of a colored display. It's thought this fell through due to the prohibitive cost of implementing a colour display and Nintendo's upcoming Game Boy looming on the horizon. Not all is lost though. To this day, the Vectrex receives large homebrew support. In 1996, John Donzilla released Vector Vaders, and since then, many independent developers have continued to add to its library. Not to say that the original didn't have anything to offer. In fact, the Vectrex has a built-in game called Mindstorm. If you've ever played Asteroids, you know what to expect here. The tech behind the Vectrex, there was a CPU, a Motorola 68A09, clocked at 1.6 MHz. The RAM was 1 kilobit. The sound was a General Instrument AY38912, and the screen was a black and white 9-inch monitor. Nothing could behold the majesty of the Vectrex. At the time of release, it was a technological marvel, pretty much a mini arcade in your home. Its bottom control panel is outfitted with the controller alongside 2 designated ports for multiplayer and additional peripherals like a light pen and 3D imager that even preceded the Sega scope. The controller itself is an arcade-style joystick with 4 buttons. Ingeniously, the shape of the controller is even designed so that the wiring coils around the joystick and fits back snugly into the bottom compartment when not in use. Very clever. There are many of those who grew up playing pixel-based games, a look most would associate with video games today. I ask you though to take a look at what this little, big console was trying to achieve. Vector graphics were rarely seen in the gaming devices, and despite its bulky nature now, it must have seemed super sleek back in the 80s thanks to its self-contained design. The potential was there for great success. Who knows how the history of video games could have changed if Milton Bradley had released a vector graphic portable with a coloured screen at the time of the Game Boy. However, we all know how things panned out in the end. It may have failed commercially due to forces out with its own control, but as the homebrew scene proves, at the very least, the Vectrex is not forgotten.